Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Cultish, entering the kingdom of the cults. My name is Jeremiah Roberts, one of the co-hosts here. I'm flying solo today. Andrew, the super sleuth of the show, is sleuthing away at our working on our project on Seventh-day Adventism. We just wanted to have him solely focus on the super sleuthing for that episode. So I'm again flying solo today. I'm here with Will. It's good to see you, man.
It's good to see you too, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump in, start at the very beginning from when I first met you. It was last January. It was, for anyone who goes to Apologia, it's man camp.
Yeah.
That's our men's retreat where we go away and do man stuff and rah, like just eat steaks and just do all the man stuff.
We did some pretty manly stuff, actually.
Right. And then it was the last evening where we're just hanging around a little bonfire that we had made. I kind of talked to you a little bit in passing, and I think you had mentioned you had some experiences and some New Age stuff. I didn't know to what extent. You came with some tarot cards that you made yourself.
Yeah, that I painted.
You had painted yourself, and then you burned them in the fire. We've posted that video a couple times where you threw it into the fire and you wanted to do that.
Yeah.
It's good to have you here now. I want to hear more. I feel like I want to hear the full story.
Oh, yeah.
Because I just in that moment, I was like, man, I got to hear more about you. So, so just tell everyone about, just give them the real quick Cliff Notes resume so people kind of know what we're going to talk about, and then we'll kind of dissect it piece by piece.
Yeah. So I guess, first of all, thanks for having me on. This is really exciting for me to get to tell this story and so many things I've never really talked about before. So I guess I've spent the past 30 or so years exploring spirituality and world religions kind of firsthand, because as far back as I can remember, I've been interested in the search for truth. It's just been part of who I am. Nothing that I was really ever sent on. It's just part of my own curiosity. So I was born Jewish. I was bar mitzvahed when I was 13. And my Torah portion, which is kind of like the portion that's given as the sermon in church, my Torah portion was the 10 Commandments. And that was randomly assigned. I didn't pick it. So if you're going to get a Torah portion, it's a pretty good one to start with. And I remember the rabbi was going over the nature of the 10 Commandments with me. And I remember he said something along the lines of the second 5 of the 10 Commandments are there so you don't violate the first of the 5 10 Commandments, something like that. And I remember thinking, I was 13, I was like, or 12 actually. I was like, that's really interesting that there's the structure to this that I never would have thought about before. And that's the first time that I can remember really having a thought about religion or spirituality and that curiosity.
So it's really, as a young boy, you're in a synagogue and your rabbi is having this conversation about the 10 Commandments. That just gets you just curious, that kind of like, what is this? Let me see more what this is all about. Is that kind of what that was all about?
Yeah, I mean, I was in the rabbi's office and he was talking to me about that. And I can still remember myself in the chair and having this little spark of a thought like, that's really interesting, because I knew what the 10 Commandments were, but I'd never really given any thought to them as a thing. But I remember being 12 years old and be like, that's really interesting, and being really curious about that. And that's the first time I remember having thoughts about religion or spirituality, or this idea of wanting to explore. And so then after that, I went to a Jesuit high school, Brophy, here in Phoenix, and a class on hermeneutics and exegesis. On Isaiah was the book that I got. And it was interesting I was Jewish at the time, growing up Jewish and going to a Catholic high school and having to figure out like, well, I don't know much about Catholicism, but I know that whatever I believe is not the same as what these other boys believe, and having to come into some amount of reconciliation with that, but not being uncomfortable with it. Like other people were like, you're Jewish, why are you here? It's like, this is the place where I'm meant to be, right? Or not, this is the best school in town. It's where I'm supposed to be going. And so that was the first time I was really introduced to the idea of there being multiple world religions and having to exist in this space of, well, I don't know how to reconcile these two, so I'm just going to exist in the tension of it.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Have you ever wanted to get behind the microphone and chat with myself and Andrew, the super sleuth of the show here at Cultish? Well, guess what? You get to do exactly that this October 27th through the 29th at ReformCon. It's going to be a great and awesome live conference. There's going to be a lot of great speakers. So if you want to get behind a microphone with myself and Andrew, the super sleuth of the show, go to reformcon.org. Get your tickets right now, October 27th through the 29th, and can't wait to meet you all there and have a great conversation. Now back to the episode. When you mentioned like you're going to a Jesuit high school, I feel like that word it gets thrown around, especially
What,
in
high
the
school?
New Age world, just
Oh.
because it's very that Jesuits almost gets thrown out as a pejorative.
Oh,
Like
okay.
these are the people that are controlling the world. Dr. Fauci's a Jesuit. This
Is
person's a
he?
Jesuit. I don't know.
The Pope is a
I guess
Jesuit.
right.
Yeah.
Like what is like for you? What's that like? I mean, being in that world. I mean, did they have kind of like their own brand of I don't know, like what from your perspective, like what's that like with being in a Jesuit high school? Like,
Well, somewhere in the sophomore year, they took us down into the catacombs where they showed us the place that they actually controlled the world from.
oh,
It was a big control room.
yeah,
It's like, oh, that's interesting. No, I mean,
kind of like a Pinky in the Brain episode,
yeah, exactly. It's the several floors beneath the
right?
ground. What's the Spies Like Us, like that Chevy Chase movie?
Right.
No, I mean, I don't know that I could properly articulate the difference between Jesuit and Catholic proper theology, but they really cared about making sure that we got a good education, especially the priests. That really came across. They forced us to think very hard about literary and religious issues, asked very tough questions, and not every teacher there was Catholic or Jesuit for that matter. Not all of them were priests. But I just remember it being a very rigorous education that taught me how to think critically about things. But I don't know that I ever learned while I was there that much about Catholic theology, or I didn't know how to take in what I was learning. We learned about the Bible and about Western religion, the Western religious tradition kind of broadly, but I never walked away feeling like, oh, I want to be Catholic now. But I did participate in the masses, and I did go on the retreats, the Kairos retreats that they were leading, which had a lot of singing and a lot of personal discussions about life and forgiveness and stuff. So that was what I got exposed to there. But I wouldn't say that I'd be able to really say what Jesuit theology is about.
Yeah. With your pursuit of religion, just curiosity, what was your upbringing like? Did you have a strong household, mother and father, or what was the nature of your upbringing when it comes to that? Because I feel like a lot of times when I've spoken with people who are who kind of end up going to the New Age, a lot of the catalyst from goes to that comes from their background as far as a home, whether it's a
Yeah.
put together home, most of the times a broken home. What's that like? What was that like for you growing up?
My parents were married, and they stayed married the entire time while I was home. They did get divorced after I went to college, and I wouldn't say that was where that was my interest, where my interest in spirituality came from. That really started when I moved up to the Bay Area to go to college, and I sort of became immersed in this, Bay Area New Age, New Wave kind of like way of looking at the world. And I became a DJ in the rave scene, played in nightclubs and festivals, and that was where that whole thing really took off with a lot of the experiences that I had with psychedelics and drugs, and Buddhism and Eastern mysticism was just a part of that. And that's where I really began exploring the New Age, because it was just a taken for granted way of seeing the world.
Right.
My interest in spirituality broadly has been a part of me as far back as I can remember. But when I was growing up, just to give a sense of the religious background, like we weren't, there's different kinds of Judaism. We were mostly secular, but we
Right.
did observe the high holidays. So Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah at the big auditorium downtown, the big high holiday services. We did go to those. We didn't celebrate Christmas. We celebrated Passover. But it wasn't really like a discussion about this is how ultimate reality works. It was more of like a cultural thing.
Gotcha.
So it wasn't until I got to the California that I really started diving into a lot of
Okay,
that
so at least
more.
as a young kid, like the Hanukkah song by Adam Sandler, like you'd really resonate with that.
You're gonna
If it gives me funny for a second.
Oh, just taking me back. Man.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're in very traditional Jewish household, very strict observance, at least from your perspective of the Torah. The observance of certain holidays and other holidays you're not involved in.
Right.
Like, at what point did kind of like the very first step, like into the New Age, go to? Like, was it like an Eckhart Tolle book? Was it some sort of was it like a Tony Robbins like audio where he's talking about the law of attraction, or for some people it starts off with the book The Secret,
Right.
and then it goes to some sort of conference that is like the author's hosting with a bunch of other people. Then they find out like Dr. Wayne Dyer, like you name it, and it starts going and progressing. Like, what was it like for you? Where was where was like step one of the first path on 1,000 steps?
Well, when I went to the Bay Area to go to school, I was taking classes on on Taoism and Buddhism in college because, again, it was expressing my religious interest. But it wasn't until New Year's Eve 2000, Y2K actually, I was at a rave here in Phoenix. I was living in California, but I came back to go to this rave, and I took an ecstasy pill. And I had that first psychedelic experience, you know, and I immediately after that fell into the whole DJ world. And the underground DJ world in California at the time was just saturated with, you know, Be Here Now, Terrence McKenna. This is pre 9/11 too, so it's like Terrence McKenna wrote a book called. It's about something about the primitive, return of the primitive, something like that. And again, Ram Dass and a lot of Eastern mysticism and Hinduism and you know Paramahansa Yogananda, like it's just part of that world. And so that's how I splashed down into it. These conversations were happening all the time.
Well, yeah, and there's always interesting too because things do go hand in hand. It's funny you mentioned the whole DJ and trance world, and how like literally that goes hand in hand with ecstasy. So when you think about like the pre 2000, the only reason why I know about trance is because Pastor Jeff, we ran a karate school together, and he would like listen to like that techno and trance as he would like work on his karate, work on his forms. So that's the other byproduct why I know that people like DJ Tiesto, Paul Oakenfold. But when the people who go down those rabbit trails, especially those who like go to their concerts, man, oh man, like you are entering, you're entering into a wild world when you go into that. But those two things are interconnected. But you also see the commonality between even like psychedelic uses, which we'll jump into, and New Age spirituality. They're inherently intertwined.
Yeah, so the DJ world has like 3 layers to it. There's the nightclub world, which is like a nightclub, you know, alcohol and stuff like that. A layer beneath that, there's like the small rave and like warehouses are in the forest or something like that. That's a different set of drugs. And then you go to the big massive festivals. I know you want to talk about Burning Man, and Burning Man is the most, is the most massive of all of them. That's where you get into the hardcore psychedelics. That's where you get into the acid and mushrooms and DMT and all that stuff. So the deeper you go into it, the more psychedelic it gets versus like the surface level in the bars and stuff like that. So that whole world is really where you get to see where the values are made manifest. You know, into just again Eastern mysticism and Shiva and Buddha and aliens on mushrooms and stuff like that, and they really believe all that. Like that's just and Jesus is not allowed at those festivals, by the way. He's not welcome. You can sneak him in though. We'll talk about that.
So you're doing the DJ trance, start getting into ecstasy, and tell me again, like how did that, like how to explain like what was the catalyst from those two things put together into like the other New Age modalities? Yeah,
so in that world, you know, we're just, when we're not like DJing, we're just all hanging out and talking, and naturally we're talking about spirituality. Also, The Matrix came out around this time, and that got everyone asking all these big questions about reality, you know, it's like, wake up out of the Matrix, right? So it's just sort of a subject of conversation. People are, again, reading spiritual books and are going back to the 60s, you know, because Ram Dass wrote this book called Be Here Now, right? And you start exploring the origins of the DJ culture, which is in the psychedelic culture of like the 1960s, sort of metastasized to like a new expression through DJ culture. So that's just the stuff that we're talking about. Yeah. You know,
also too, like I'm 41 and you got like 2 years.
I'm 44.
44? Okay. Well, I guess both of us are aging well. So
yes.
Guess I got to keep on working on that. But yeah, dude, people don't realize, I mean, right now it's 2022 and they're right now you can go on Netflix or Amazon Prime or you can go to all the different streaming stations. Like people didn't realize like the impact that the film like The Matrix had. Yeah, like it was revolutionary from special effects. Like obviously bullet time, like seeing Trinity jump up and do that 360 kick and watching kind of like all that Eastern film and the first dojo fight scene and fighting Agent Smith.
Yep.
But there was so much layered like spirituality in that got people, that's what made it a cult film. I mean, there's plenty of other films that came out at that time with cool, like similar special effects. There was something about The Matrix that was really had a longevity because of what was communicated. Even when you talk about the psychedelics, like the very opening scene where Neo is talking to the people that he's doing the trade-off, where he's giving them, because he's a hacker, and all of a sudden he's like, "Do you ever have that feeling like you're awake, you don't really know it?" And I think the guy refers to some sort of like
Mescaline.
Mescaline, yeah. Yeah, but then all of a sudden he follows them like to this night rave techno club.
Yep.
Which was so prominent like during that time.
Yeah.
So it would make sense, especially for anyone around this time, like in college. It was a cult film. I knew people who watched it like 50, 60 times. It was crazy.
Yeah, people were dressing up and waiting in line. And also at the same time, a bunch of movies came out, and I think it was the same summer, the same time. It was The Matrix, Fight Club, Office Space. All three of these movies came out around the same time. And there was also this movie Blade with Wesley Snipes.
Oh, yeah.
You know, where he goes to the underground vampire rave.
Right.
It was part of the culture. It was just being manifested in all these ways. But when you put together the message of The Matrix, Fight Club, and Office Space, that's a pretty powerful anti-establishment message that takes everything way too far. It says true things, but then the conclusions that these movies draw are way, way, way too extreme and ultimately destructive. But when you feed that all into the mind of young college kids, they don't know any better. And when you have a destroyed social structure, many of whom are coming from broken homes kind of situations, they don't necessarily have the critical thinking skills to be able to say, hey, maybe that's going a bit too far. But that's what was going on around the turn of the century.
Yeah. No, for sure. And then
Millennium.
Which also, when you talk about the millennium, I mean, like time-wise too, a lot of people don't realize from 1997 to 2000, there was just a lot of wondering, like, what did the year 2000 like really entail? The beginning of the millennium, there was just a lot of people that had apocalyptic ideas. You had like Y2K.
All the computers in the world are going to shut down.
There are plenty of people, even like people, Bible prophecy experts, saying the book of Revelation was talking about Y2K, and here we are all this later, all this technology intact.
Yeah, exactly.
So where did it go from here? So you're checking out stuff like The Matrix, you're in the DJ world, you start experimenting with other stuff. Obviously, you mentioned mescaline and other things like that.
I did. I personally didn't try mescaline, but acid, ecstasy, mushrooms were like just part of the currency, I guess you might say.
Yeah.
Also, I left school. I started my own company. I'd started a .com. And so we had raised like $25 million from Hewlett Packard. So, you know, I was a young guy. I was at the time like 21, 22 years old, making a ton of money, you know, and, I don't have anything to spend it on, but having a good time. So here I am able to have a really great time on the weekends and still get my stuff done during the week in this visionary kind of world. So then once that wrapped up, I went back to school, and that's when I discovered Jungian psychology. I took a class on Carl Jung, which is all about the inner mind and the way to understand the self and this. And so that all fit together with a lot of the DJ stuff from the psychedelic world going into the inner world, like, all the different pieces of the mind, the way to understand oneself. And that's when I started going in that direction of exploring psychology.
Yeah, so almost like you were seeing like the layers of like oneism, like no blend, like a complete blending of us with creation. There's no distinction between creator and creation. All is one, all is self.
Yes.
And all of a sudden it's like you are reading this philosophy that's depicting this worldview, and then you're saying, and just tell me if I'm correct, I'm just thinking out loud, like this worldview is almost affirming or depicting accurately your psychedelic experiences.
It's helping understand the psychedelic experiences, because the psychedelic experiences take you deep into yourself, and not necessarily in good ways or even enjoyable ways. But it's difficult to understand what's actually going on in there, because it's a big mess inside the human mind. And mind and heart. There's so much going on, and Jung's approach to it, and Freud as well, because Jung was based on Freud's work, helped me start taking some of those things apart. In some of the ways, it was actually good, because it helped me understand like confusing things that I was experiencing. But the ideology that comes with it, the oneness ideology that comes with so much of it, is the part that they don't actually talk about. You know, it's some of the ideas like, hey, you can use this to change your life. And what you don't understand is all these other train cars are attached to that idea that you never end up questioning, that I didn't end up questioning until years later.
Yeah. All right. So where did it go from here? Did you, when you got into the Jung psychology, did it end there? Was it like, okay, I think I found the oasis in the desert. I can just reside here and go on with my life? Or was that a catalyst to try one thing after another?
That's how the new age world works, is it's always one thing after another.
Yep.
I can explain why that is, or do you want me to save that for later?
Maybe explain, maybe just a little bit, because, and this is something, if anyone has listened into our other episode, you see a consistent pattern with people. People will get into the new age by way of like a simple book, maybe getting into something where they experience a psychedelic for the first time, but it's never enough. It's almost, I use the term a spiritual narcotic.
Yes, very much.
Is that an accurate depiction?
It's both. So the New Age world is heavily based on Eastern mysticism, like Advaita Vedanta and some aspects of Buddhism. What Eastern mysticism says is any notion of you and me being separate beings is actually false.
Yeah.
That at a deeper level of reality, all is one. So we have this experience of having a conscious mind, of having an ego, of having free will. Eastern mysticism says your free will is an illusion. So you have this knot of consciousness, right? And you have to get past this knot of consciousness to realize your eternal oneness. And that's enlightenment or nirvana. To get past this knot of consciousness, you have to untie the knot. What the New Age does is it takes that and it says, to untie this really complicated knot, you have to do this modality to peel off this, and then this modality to peel off this. And then you end up peeling forever trying to undo this knot of free will, but you'll never actually get there. You can never actually do it.
Well, even from a worldview standpoint, that's self-refuting because you are the knot and the knot is you.
Yes.
Like, how can you untie yourself from something that is yourself? In the same way, the whole idea behind the New Age, and I feel like every single person in the New Age, they always try and seek ascension by any way possible, whether it's trying to go to Burning Man or trying to do Kundalini yoga or if it's Reiki healing. They're all trying to ascend. But how do you ascend outside of yourself when all is self? There's no way to get outside of this. And so it ends up being like literally like this vicious karmic circle.
Yes. You that's why people get trapped in this loop of spending more and more money and doing more and more extreme things. Like if you haven't actually achieved it, you just haven't tried hard enough yet. So trying hard can be an investment of either time, money, or energy. And so you get people doing these really difficult practices for long periods of time, trying to undo the knot of self, or spending tens of thousands of dollars, or even giving their lives over to a guru, stuff like that. The more energy that you pour into yourself, trying to undo yourself, and as you rightfully sense, it's a trap, and you can't actually do it.
Yeah. So after you're doing that type of psychology and that study in college, like what was the next step? Because again, given what we're talking about, and this is a progressive story, it didn't end there. What was the next step after that?
The next step after that is around the same time I started going to Burning Man. I've been to 3 times, and that's just what you do in the Bay Area. It's just, now it's the
first time was 2003?
2003, yeah.
What was it like the very first time that you went there?
It was kind of like the Wild West, actually. Like no one really knew what they were doing. Everything was very much like plywood and fire, and it had this real like renegade spirit, but also infused with a lot of the same drugs and sex kind of sexuality.
How did you find out about it? Because like 2003 was pre-social media. I mean, we had email, America Online. Could we text in 2003? I can't remember.
I first texted in 2004, so I don't think so.
But even if you did, you had to hit like one, the circle between like A, B, and C. Like even tell people too, like you don't know, to like the younger generation, you got the iPhone 14 coming out, like you haven't seen the things I've seen. You don't know me.
You don't know me. We had to fast forward through cassette tapes if we wanted to hear the next song. You had to get it right when you were rewinding. But
communicate, was it word of mouth or was it a flyer? Did you get like an ad? Was it just like part of maybe just a college fraternity you were part of back then that was into that? Like what?
No, I mean,
how did
like
you find out about it?
In the DJ and rave scene, we would go to festivals. There'd be various, and this is in the Bay Area too. So there'd be various festivals in the Bay Area to go to, and people just knew about it. And in the Bay Area, we did actually have other forms of social media. We had tribe.net, which was very popular. I don't know that it ever made it nationwide, and LiveJournal. So those were 2 social media platforms that me and my circle of friends were using. Someone would inevitably find out about. It's like, oh, there's this thing in the desert. Plus, at that point, Burning Man had been going on at Baker Beach in San Francisco for, I want to say, like 10 years. So it started on a beach just beneath the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, and then it got so big, then it moved out to the Nevada desert where people have started hearing about it now. So I think when I went in 2003, it had been in the desert for maybe 3 to 5 years. But even then, it was 30,000 people, right? But it was all just a word of mouth thing. And it was, even back then, it was like people would say, oh, I'm taking the last week off. They wouldn't tell their employers. It's like, oh, I'm going to take this week off to go on vacation, to go spend time with family, is what people would say.
Yeah.
But now Burning Man is literally part of San Francisco culture. Like, you have to go almost.
Well, it's also interesting too. Well, he knocked over, actually. This book, Kingdom of the Occult by Dr. Walter Martin, I figured I'd have this on set just to, I mean, this is a catalyst for a conversation that we'll talk about further on the podcast. By now, if you went in the video, if you ever watched the video, you've seen it long enough, you know what the book is.
Yeah. He's great, by the way. You introduced me to him. He's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. So like 2003, you had like 30,000 people that were at this festival. Like what did you see like happening like at this festival? You mean like drugs and every people are just sort of doing everything like they are now, just kind of dressing up all these like different costumes, wearing stuff or the lack thereof. And people are just, kind of take us into that world. So Burning Man is a music and arts festival in Nevada. You're putting like quotation marks.
Well, like, so there's a whole ideology that comes with the Burning Man world. And very similar to Oneism and the New Age and Eastern mysticism, they frame all forms of self-expression as inherently spiritual. And if it's inherently spiritual, it's inherently good. So the idea is that you go out to Burning Man for 1 week a year and you are free to express yourself however seems best for you. Whatever constraints that you put on yourself in the normal world, you take those off when you go to Burning Man and you express yourself however you want, and your freedom of self-expression, whatever that is, whether that's painting your body blue and walking around naked, whether it's, all kinds of hedonistic practices, drinking, drugs, alcohol, sex, dancing, whatever it is, and also artwork and music and stuff, that is by nature inherently spiritual. So you see all of that out there, it's the place where it's not only facilitated, it's encouraged. It's like you're supposed to go out there and you're supposed to express yourself in the craziest possible way, and that's how you do Burning Man. That's how you do it right. Is to really do it up. Like, are you really expressing yourself enough? Are you going crazy enough? Are you really being spiritual enough? That's the whole ideology behind the thing. So, but back then, it wasn't as clearly articulated. So you had people like, what are we doing out here in the desert? I'll just kind of go crazy, and do cool stuff and blow stuff up that we couldn't do in the regular world. But I went back 10 years later in 2013 and all that had changed, and the festival had really gone pro, and had really, its values had really hardened and crystallized into hedonism and radical self-expression of whatever it is now mandatory. Back then it was a bit more renegade, really like the Wild West. Those values were there, but it was just an element. But then those values had taken over a decade later.
Hey everyone, if you are watching us right now on Apologia Studios YouTube channel, you need to know that Cultish would not be possible if it wasn't for this studio. So if you want to support Apologia Studios, which also makes Cultish a possibility for you to enjoy every single week here on YouTube, go to apologiastudios.com. You can become an all-access member, and you will also get a lot of great additional content, which will also help support the studio, which will allow Cultish to be a possibility as well on a weekly basis. So we thank you all for watching us, and now back to the episode. But even though I never saw the movie, I think there's a couple movies that came out, like The Purge, where all of a sudden, like one night, you get one night to be able to do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
The rest of the time, everything else is like illegal.
Yeah.
Almost in the same way, Burning Man, you've got like 1 week to
Yes.
fully express yourself.
Literally.
But then once that happens, you get back in your gas-guzzling RVs and create a bunch of carbon emissions as you are driving out of Burning Man.
Yes.
But the rest of the time, you can worry about saving the planet.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is the people who go to Burning Man call it home. And when you drive up to Burning Man at the entrance, there's a big sign that says "Welcome Home."
Right.
The idea being Burning Man is your home where you can be your true self, and you're being your fake self the rest of the time. Now, that idea has this romantic kind of appeal, but it's actually really destructive to think that way. That 51 weeks of your life per year, you're not home, but that 1 week of the year is your home. It's actually the other way around. But people get really lost and they focus their whole lives on that 1 week of the year where they can really be themselves, and completely miss that the rest of the year, you're also actually like being yourself. Yeah. Right. And so you nailed it. Yeah.
So in other words, like they're literally like planning, like when someone's leaving, like we had that, we posted a picture on social media of that 9-hour like trek.
Yeah.
That's
people
an annual
thing.
Leaving Burning Man, but even like as they're leaving, as they're in many ways both physically and spiritually hungover for that entire week of just all the craziness, they're already thinking, okay, how do I get myself ready for next year?
Yes. They'll get back and they'll immediately start thinking about next year.
So
Camps will start planning and everything.
Okay. And so like, what about Black Rock? They call it Black Rock City.
Mm-hmm.
That's the name for it. Like, why? Where did that name come from? Why did they call it that? Do you know?
I don't actually know, but it's just it's the location. Black Rock City is the formal name of the place. Burning Man is the festival that's held at Black Rock City, but Black Rock City doesn't exist except for a couple weeks a year. When I say a couple weeks, the festival itself was only 1 week, but there are a bunch of people on site a week to 2 weeks before building all the structures, and then a week to 2 weeks after tearing it all down and cleaning up. But Black Rock City is where they host it. Gotcha.
Okay, that makes sense then. So like going back, like you're this whole trajectory of a journey, like looking into spirituality, understanding this. What was the name of the psychology you're going through in high school? It was
Jungian psychology.
Yeah, Jungian psychology. So you're going through all that, and then you go to Burning Man for the first time, and people have kind of seen bits and pieces. Even a lot of people on our social media are like, there's like moms who are like, what is Burning Man? Like they don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
And maybe I can just go off track just for a second. This is important. Like, why are we even discussing something like Burning Man?
Yeah.
What was something that was kind of fringe on like back in 2003 that was like super punk rock. This is like an underground like punk rock show. Like whoever the people who saw the Ramones for the first time in some backstage somewhere, like that would be equivalent to what Burning Man was in 2003.
I think that's fair.
Now it would be the equivalent of them like opening up with the Rolling Stones, and like everyone knows who the Ramones and the Rolling Stones are.
Yes, and not only that, there are Burning Man festivals now that are around the world. Burning Man was always intended to not just be one festival in the Nevada desert. Now there are continental and even national burns. There's a thing called Africa Burn.
Right.
Apparently, some of these Burning Man festivals around the world attract tens of thousands of people as well.
Yeah.
So where they're exporting the ideology to other countries.
Right. So this is just indicative of what you're seeing depicted in entertainment. You're seeing the normalization of psychedelics, but you're also seeing the normalization of these festivals, which is really just a regurgitation of just ancient neo-paganism. I mean, like if anyone actually looks at what happens in a Burning Man festival, like, are you actually shocked? I mean, given the fact if you did look at ancient Greece, if you look at the Persian Empire, look at any of these ancient empires, are they not, they're doing similar festivals and then some, like way extra than we are now.
Absolutely. And I know I have never been there, praise God for that, but and I heard about it only after, but there's a place at Burning Man called the Orgy Dome. It's literally a dome that you can walk into, and I got no idea what goes on in there, but I think the name itself is provocative enough.
This seems to be very self-explanatory for sure.
Yeah, I think so. And the thing is, if you make yourself and your own self-expression God, and you seek to worship that God, what's the end product of that? The end product of that, everything is permitted. Do what thou wilt.
I was literally thinking that I was about to say the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Worldviews have consequences for sure.
Absolutely do. They absolutely do.
All right, so you left. So leaving 2003, like after you'd experienced really the underground version of Burning Man for the first time, like what was it? Was this where you still kind of running off sort of like the spiritual ecstasy, where it felt like this is the most amazing transcendent experience? Was it kind of like, I don't know, well maybe they have you longing for something more, or what happened after that?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, it just becomes a way of life. Exploring New Age, mystical kind of ideas is just the way that I'm kind of living. Again, part of that is because of my natural curiosity about spirituality and religion that goes back to when I was a little kid. Part of it is because that's the cultural expectation of living in San Francisco. Part of that is being in the dance and DJ world. And part of it is like, an inappropriate fun. It's not necessarily good for me, but it's just part of my life in all this way that I'm not really questioning. Part of the reason why that is because there's no worldview that's permitted to be outside it that questions it. Because the only worldview that's outside of Eastern mysticism, New Age, is Christianity. And that's the place you don't go there. That is the forbidden land, right? So where are you going to pop out from the New Age world to look at it objectively from the outside? There really isn't any option. Right, besides like atheism, but like atheism ultimately ends up in a very similar place of hedonism, just with fewer mystical trappings.
Yeah, and that's the distinction. I think one of the reasons why Jesus, the real person, the Jesus Christ of Nazareth, who is the God come in the flesh, is so antithetical to New Age thinking
Yes.
and just all sorts of pagan spirituality and whatever you want to call it, is because Jesus Christ represents distinctly Twoism versus Oneism.
Yes.
There's a complete distinction between creator and creation, but there's also a complete intermingling of sorts of the flesh and the spirit. Because a lot of this spirituality is also connected to Gnosticism, which was the first enemy of the Christian church, where Gnosticism was saying that the flesh is evil, but the spirit is good. And you see that also carried out in the idea of like the ego and trying to separate yourself from that. The gospel and who Christ is makes that categorical distinction. So as much as people will try and have Jesus on their team and try and say he's an ascended master,
Christ consciousness.
right?
Yeah.
But when you start actually pushing on who the gospels are, there's a lot of willful prejudice towards, explaining the way the gospels, but totally giving credence to something like the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of the Essenes.
Right.
There's definitely a willful prejudice there for sure. So you're talking about, being curious. What happened after 2003 Burning Man? Like, I know you said you started traveling.
Oh, that was way later.
Way later? Well, what was the category? It was 2003.
I did travel a bit. I did travel overseas in Europe in 2004 for about 3 weeks. Maybe it was longer than that, but that was more an expression of like, I want to be a professional DJ, so I'm going to go to the nightclubs in Europe and I'm going to see how they do things down there. I wouldn't say that was necessarily like a spiritual trip, a New Age trip, but I mean, it had everything in the New Age world has this entire attitude of it's all about developing and expressing the self. So I would say that it was spiritual in the sense of like, this is my hero's journey, right? To do this. So it was spiritual in that sense, but it wasn't like I'm going to go do explicitly New Age kind of things. But I did go to Europe in 2004. But so you continue with your question. I mean,
the next time you went was
2013.
2013.
Yeah.
But then you went again in
2015.
2015. Like what was maybe walk through what was the gap in between those Burning Mans? What was a linear timeline of things you got curious into? You mentioned you were doing DJing in Europe, which I can only imagine. I mean, that's extra on top of American DJing and clubbing.
Take it seriously over there.
Oh yeah, very seriously.
Yeah.
As we said, the standard a lot of times is anything worth doing is worth overdoing, and you probably saw that carried out for sure.
Oh yeah. A good example is that in America, nightclubs only stay open usually until 2:00 in the morning or so because that's when the bars close. Right. So, but in Europe, nightclubs start at 2:00 in the morning right, around the world because they don't have those same laws. So, and the entire global DJ world is fueled by cocaine and alcohol. That's just how it runs. Thankfully, I never got into either of those things, but I know a lot of people who've completely lost themselves as a result of that. But so I guess over the course of from 2003 to 2013, I continued exploring psychology, probably more directly in the realm of Jungian psychology, because I found it was really interesting to try and understand my own mind as a man, because studying masculinity has been something that I've been interested in for the past, by this point, it's 20 or so years. But I found that it was helpful for me to understand that, to heal various aspects of myself. But I continued reading as many books about Eastern mysticism and spirituality as I could get my hands on. That's when I found Eckhart Tolle. There was a book called New Self, New World, which tries to put Buddhism together with astrology and various practices like that. I've done all kinds of different healing modalities, different kinds of body work and sound healing and all this stuff. It's just what you do. It's like, oh, that sounds like a cool way to experience the self or to transcend the self. Let me do that. And so I spent a number of years doing that. I didn't go back to Burning Man during that time because Burning Man's actually a very expensive proposition to go.
What do people how much did it cost? What is it? Do you know what it costs now to go to it? Isn't like $2,500
is that
just for the ticket?
Oh, I don't even know, but I would expect to pay at least that much because you have to bring your own food, bring your own water, right? How are you going to get out there? Are you going to borrow someone's car? Your car is going to get full of dust. You're going to have to get your car cleaned. Are you going in an RV? An RV is a whole thing. Do you want to camp in a tent? You can go on the cheap, but you're going to be spending, on the cheap still means probably $1,000 to $2,000. If I had to guess, I don't even know what the tickets are. The last I heard, a discount ticket was $900, but that may have changed. But remember, 80,000 people and plus, so run the numbers on that. Plus there are camps. So giant camps of people. I believe that the camps have to pay a fee as well. Huge money-making endeavor. The Burning Man Foundation, I think it's called, which helps coordinate all these worldwide. It's a giant organization that has a giant ideology attached to it that no one ever questions, because the promise of drugs and sex and hedonism and fun and breaking free from the strictures of society. And so no one ever asks the question like what they're signing up for and what they're swallowing, when they
Right, and not every
experience.
single, and some people are just going along to have like a fun time.
Yeah, it's
Just
a party
seem like,
time.
when you look at it, almost, even like looking at some of the videos, like I know people I'm connected to who went and they're posting on their Instagram stories, and some of the stuff looks like vehicles like out of Mad Max Fury Road. Like people literally, it's like something look like someone's playing something like that one guy with a guitar with like
Probably.
the fire going out of it.
Yeah.
Like it looks like something out of it. So there's almost part of me, even as a Christian, even we're talking about aspects in which a spiritual thing is, there's parts visually I'm like, that sounds kind of cool.
There are very cool things to see there. Like there are people that take the opportunity on the desert, on the playa, to do works of art that they can't do anywhere else, right? But again, when you're going, what are you going to be exposed to? What are you going to be around? What are you going to witness? What are you going to be asked to take for granted that actually you shouldn't be taken for granted, right? And the worldview that comes with it.
Right. What is so like what does like the Burning Man represent? I mean, it's there all week, this tower, and it's like it's a circled encampment. If you can Google like Burning Man view, guys looked it up the other day. I'm someone again from the outside looking in. You got 80,000 people, and it's essentially like circling the circle, and the Burning Man's right in the middle, and then it's at the very, very end of the festival where they burn it.
Yeah, they blow it up.
What's the idea behind that? Did that idea come out of a vacuum, or is there like a worldview behind what they're trying to depict within this festival that you're aware of?
Within the Burning Man community, there's a lot of debate about what the man stands for. And I think the party line, if you want to call it that, is the man stands for whatever you want it to. And I never really bought that. I always looked at the man as representing the man. Like that's like, stick it to the man kind of thing, like society, Western civilization, whatever you want to call it, rules, laws, external authority, like they're going to set up the man, and the man is who we all worship. I'm applying this language to the thoughts that I would have had at the time. The man who's what we all worship during the year, right? And we go out to Burning Man, and we have this big party where we do whatever we want for 6 or 7 days in the desert. No laws, no rules, no whatever, right? And then we blow up the man, like, whoa, stick to the man. And then Saturday night turns into just this giant disaster. So that's what I think the man stands for. Now, you can apply, I suppose, whatever you want to the man. It can be a man, it can be particular, it can be a version of yourself, but I really think the man that's meant to be burned is the laws of what we might understand as like modern society. Yeah.
And so in between this time, you're going around kind of jumping from, spiritual practice to spiritual practice, basically just going from A, B, C, D, E, F, G when it comes to practices. And then it was a while. You have a 5-year gap between 2000,
10 years.
No, 10 years. Like why the extended amount of time? Like what made you all of a sudden like say, okay, it's time to go back? Did it just work out that way, or was it something that recollected, maybe trying to recapture some of the spiritual ecstasy back then, or what was the transition period?
A lot of things happened for me around the same time in 2013. But part of what happened in that 10-year gap is I got into a relationship, and I'm very much a camping centric kind of guy, and she was very much a RV centric kind of girl. And to go to a festival like Burning Man in an RV is a much more massive expense than a tent for me, so we were unable to reconcile on that one, and plus the money went to other things. So but in 2013 a couple that was friends of mine got married, and they were having their honeymoon at Burning Man, so they invited some of their close friends to come with them in an RV. So the RV was all taken care of. So me and my girlfriend at the time went back in 2013 as part of their RV to celebrate this couple's honeymoon.
It seems to be such the opposite idea of honeymoon. Right? It's like
you think highest effort vacation ever.
Like I'm engaged right now, and I'm talking with my fiance about like where we're gonna go and what that looks like. But we're thinking
Coachella,
private. Like I'm thinking like private cabin out in the mountains, maybe somewhere like alone with the two of us. But the idea of going where there's 80,000 people, and given now as Christians we're looking at the monogamous nature of like being together and being married, and honestly, like you just mentioned, there's a place where there's orgies going on. It just seems to be the total last place I would think of in my mind to do a honeymoon at.
Yeah, Burning Man is renowned for being near lethal to relationships. If only because, not necessarily because one person wants to get involved in orgies and the other doesn't, but because, one person may want to go do one thing and the other person wants to go do another thing. And it's like, well, we're supposed to be together. I want to do this, you want to do that. And it causes a lot of tension. And then when you add to it all the opportunities for all the skin that's on display, turning heads or whatever, or temptations, or someone has a bad trip or whatever, and you don't get to do the whatever, it's lethal on relationships. Now, this was a really strong couple, so they were able to withstand that. But in general, like Burning Man is renowned for, like, if you're going in a relationship, either like pretend you're not in the relationship when you go to Burning Man, or prepare to come out not in a relationship.
Yeah. And also just to become wary, given that we have an audience with, mostly we're inherent, we have people from all faith backgrounds who listen to our show, but you wary that if you do look up, even if you start looking Google images for Burning Man, if you have friends who have gone to Burning Man, you start scrolling through pictures, you're probably going to see things you might regret seeing later. That's just the nature of the festival. That's just the nature, and it's a byproduct too of the worldview of do as thou wilt.
Yes.
And you see that put on display at this festival.
Very much so. I mean, mostly if you go looking for Burning Man, you'll see lots of really like gauzy edited videos of people having this happy, cheery, sunshiny good time, and those things are real. But behind the scenes of all that, people are not gonna post the videos of the orgy dome. They're not going to post videos of people getting in fights. They're not going to post people of, passing out, being sick, falling down, whatever. Like, you're not going to see all that stuff. But it's a big part of the festival. Like, it's very difficult to avoid drama and strife and conflict at the festival. It's just part of it.
Well, even now when you look at,
but they're not going to put it in videos.
We're going to maybe talk about this later. Ayahuasca, psychedelics, DMT. Those things are being normalized everywhere. Joe Rogan, Aubrey Marcus, who we're going to talk about his conversation with Aaron Rodgers. This is being normalized, even in the field of mental health. This is a good and great thing. What a lot of times isn't shared is when you see someone experiencing a bad trip, it's not a pretty thing to observe. Yeah. When you were there, that's something that would be 80,000 people at a festival. That's got to be something that's not on the flashy, happy highlights, right?
Absolutely. And the thing is, you can't escape from the festival. There's nowhere you can go because there's always loud music playing somewhere. There's always chaos. There's always noise. It quiets down at night, but there's no escape from the heat and the dust and the intensity. And some of these things aren't necessarily done in public. Like if you're going to be, smoking DMT, which is definitely done there, it's in private tents, but you got no idea what's going on in there. You can't control your environment. You can't control your influences, and people are just throwing themselves into this. And it's like fantastically dangerous. And I've had some bad trips in other circumstances. I never did psychedelics like that at Burning Man. I've had some bad trips, and it's a bad scene. It's a bad scene. And to hear people talking about psychedelics in the mainstream without acknowledging the real danger that comes with these substances it's pretty shocking to me.
Hey, what's up, everyone? We love that you are enjoying our content on a weekly basis, but this program cannot continue and wouldn't be possible without your support. So if you want to go to thecultishtshow.com, there is a donate tab. You can either support us one time, or you can become a monthly partner with us. That will allow us to continue this program, allow us to continue to be salt and light to the kingdom of the cults. So please go to thecultishtshow.com/donate, and you can support us one time or monthly. Also, make sure you check out our merchandise store. Go to shopcultish.com. You can see all of our great designs. A lot of you have gotten merchandise from us already. So again, either go to shopcultish.com and check out all the awesome merch. Back to the show. Yeah. So 2008, you came, experienced the same thing. In regards to I keep on thinking of 2008. So 2013, the 10-year difference. What was the difference in regards to like growth, popularity, the difference between the festivals? Like what was the main differences that you saw at that time?
In 2003, again, it was very much the Wild West. Things were made out of plywood. There were crude like flamethrowers because fire was a big thing in the desert, and lasers and stuff.
Yeah.
Cut to 10 years later, Burning Man had gone pro. You have camps spending literally millions of dollars to build giant outdoor, like quasi nightclubs. There was a truck called the Robot Heart. And the robot heart is a giant bus that was this multi-million-dollar project with this giant nightclub quality sound system that would just drive around and be this roving rave. So you had gone from camps made of plywood and pipe, like that sort of plastic piping that you use in like your home or whatever, like under your sink, to like giant multi-million-dollar art cars, that take a year to build and drive in and drive out. It had really gone pro. And then in that decade, Burning Man had gone from something that you kind of whispered to people that you were going to and you didn't tell your boss about. In the Bay Area, at least, it had gone to now the big tech executives are going. And so there are whole camps full of like luxury buses that park in a circle and that you need a wristband to get into, where all the food is cooked for them and everything like that. It became a vacation for tech executives. That's what it had become in about a decade. And to the point where Burning Man had been an underground part of San Francisco culture to part of San Francisco culture, meaning like participation in Burning Man was like just something that everyone took for granted. And you just kind of say, oh, I'm going to Burning Man for my vacation. And it wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was something to kind of celebrate the rest of the year as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so then like time-wise though, but then you had a shorter 2-year gap between 2013 and 2015. Did any other traveling for you personally take place between those two times?
No, because during that 2-year gap is when we started out the conversation talking about the tarot cards. Yeah. And it was in that 2-year gap that I had discovered the Western occult tradition that the tarot cards are based on.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. And it's connected to you said you had the Jewish background growing up, and we do know that is connected to the Kabbalah. And those two things kind of work together? Was there a place of identification of getting into that for you?
Well, when I was a kid, I just knew about the Torah. And so I didn't know much about that, but I got a tattoo. I want to say it was like in 2013, and it's on my left shoulder. I can't really show you right now, but it's I had been to Israel on a Birthright Israel trip, and for those who don't know, Birthright Israel is an all expense paid trip to Israel for a 10-day tour that's available to all Jewish boys and girls around the world between the ages of like 18 and 27. So all I had to do was prove that I have Jewish ancestry, and then I have to get myself to an East Coast airport, and then Birthright Israel pays for everything else after that. So I went on a Birthright Israel trip. While I was there, I got a tattoo of an Israeli flag, right? And I didn't like the tattoo. It wasn't a very good tattoo. So I got it covered up in 2013. And on the cover up, I had the words Tikkun Olam, which is a Hebrew phrase meaning to heal the world. So I posted that on Facebook in 2013. Like this is because stuff was going on with Israel. So this is what Judaism means to me. That post kind of went viral, and someone reached out to me. Is like, hey, have you ever heard of the Kabbalah? I'm like, I know what it is, but a little bit. It's like, hey, your tattoo has some meaning you might want to look into. Here, you can sign up with this school and study more about the Kabbalah. And so that was a whole area of mysticism that I'd never explored before. So I had done all of the Hinduism and all the Buddhism and the Vedanta, and I explored all that, and I had a good grasp on it. I'd never heard of the Western occult tradition. So that's the shadow side of the New Age in a way. So that's when I started exploring that whole world.
Yeah, let's do this. I feel like this has gotten everyone super intrigued. This is the first part of our conversation, and at some point we gotta cut off so I can help our producers so they're not overwhelmed. So let's do this. Let's go ahead, and we're gonna be talking more about the Kabbalah, that gap, and then we're also going to talk about further experiences with Burning Man and some of the other things you experience as well too
traveling
in your travels.
Yeah,
quite a. Yes, definitely quite a trip, both literally, both in traveling, but also in some of the stuff that you're using, which you find out later wasn't a good thing. You catch my drift.
I do, yeah. Believe me.
Yeah, anyways, so if you guys have enjoyed this episode with Will, definitely check that out. Real quickly, you have a podcast.
I do.
Tell everyone just real quickly about the podcast, where they can find you, and what you're all about.
So my podcast is called The Renaissance of Men. One of the things I've been studying, as I mentioned earlier, in addition to spirituality, was masculinity. I've been studying it for 20 years and helped change my own life by discovering what that meant. And I discovered that there are many other men around the world asking the same question. So I started a podcast to speak to some of these men that are trying to recreate what it means to be a masculine man, and some women that are trying to recreate what it means to be a feminine woman. And that helped lead me to Christ. And so now my podcast is talking about masculinity, Christianity, femininity, and that's The Renaissance of Men. And you can find that by going to Linktree/Ren of Men is probably the best place to go.
Which, to also keep you all waiting, the nature of masculine, feminine, that's also directly related to the New Age and identity,
Mm.
and how that also affects who we are now in Christ. So that we're going to be kind of exploring what you talk about in the podcast, but also in linear, like with your testimony, and also like how we address it in the real world.
Yeah.
How we analyze those clips later on of Aubrey Marcus and Aaron Rodgers. So, oh, I can't wait.
Sounds
All
good.
right. If you guys enjoyed this episode, let us know what you thought. Comment on our social media. And as always, a program like this cannot continue without your support. All that being said, we'll talk to you guys next week on Cultish, where you enter into the kingdom of the cults. Talk to you guys soon.